Hi, everyone, I'm Dan Abrams, and this is Court Cam.
Call the buzzer, call.
Take him back! Take him out!
You die in prison as well.
The people of the state of Michigan have proven each of these counts.
First up, we're in Muskegon, Michigan for the trial of Robert G. The 31-year-old was charged with numerous crimes, including murder, following an incident that began outside this bar. 8 months earlier, G's friend Deshaun Boylan stole a car from the bar's parking lot, as briefly seen in the security video. Outside, 26-year-old Jake Ramo saw his brother's car being stolen, so he sprang into action. Tossing his jacket aside, he jumped on his motorcycle and sped after the carjacker. Unknown to Ramo, he was also being pursued by a car with Robert Gee inside. Just a few blocks from the bar, Gee allegedly leaned out the window of the moving car and shot Ramo in the back, causing him to crash his motorcycle in the yard of a homeowner who called 911.
What's going on there? Some guy that drove his motorcycle in my yard. He's laying in your yard? Yeah, he's out. We do have the fire department and ambulance and the police in route, okay?
Ramo would die at the scene of the accident before paramedics arrived. During a 3-day bench trial, Judge Timothy Hicks heard eyewitness testimony from others who were inside the car that night with G, claiming that he was the one who shot Ramo in the back. And the prosecution argues G's actions that night were intentional.
He went to the head, neck, torso, arm, out that window to take aim. He intends to hit that man on the bike with the bullet.
The evidence is enough for Judge Hicks to find Gee guilty of first-degree murder.
The people of the state of Michigan have proven each of these counts: open murder, felony firearm, felony possession of a weapon.
As you can hear, emotion is building in the gallery following that guilty verdict.
And second felony firearm count beyond a reasonable doubt.
Before Judge Hicks can finish speaking, the courtroom erupts. What caused the outburst from the gallery? It started when G first appeared woozy and rests his head on the table. Members of his family. As the deputy checks on G, who appears responsive, some of his family members are removed from the courtroom. Moments later, Judge Hicks tries to continue with the proceeding.
The court says this.
But is interrupted again by the screaming outside the courtroom. Finally, things settle down, just in time for the family's concerns to be realized, as the defendant passes out in his chair.
We'll leave the courtroom, Your Honor.
Okay. We're going to take Mr. G out of the courtroom? All right.
Robert.
Robert G. would return to the courtroom under his own power to complete the hearing. He was later sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Jake Ramo. As for Deshaun Boylan, who stole Ramo's brother's car and set the entire chain of events in motion, he was found guilty of first-degree felony murder in perpetration of a larceny and was also sentenced to life in prison without parole.
I wish Judge Allen would say to me, do whatever you want. I would kill you.
Next, we go to Cincinnati, Ohio, for the sentencing of Dennis Alsip. The 22-year-old was found guilty of aggravated vehicular homicide, causing the crash that killed 22-year-old Lisa Hastings. Alsip was under the influence of both drugs and alcohol when he began weaving through traffic at dangerous speeds. Hastings was approaching in the opposite direction on her way to work as an EMT. Alsip hit her head on. The collision so intense, Alsip's vehicle actually ended up on top of Hastings. While Alsip suffered no major injuries, Hastings was airlifted to a hospital where she held on for 2 days before she died. Now, if Alsip receives the maximum sentence, he can be sent to prison for 8 years. At sentencing, Lisa's mother, Karen Hastings, uses photos of her daughter from before and after the accident to deliver a raw and powerful impact statement.
When you were asked, do you know what you just did? You said no. This is what you did. She didn't ask for this. You should have been you. You'd be an idiot yourself. And this is where she is now. That's in solitary. Turned the red ice sprinkle on her birthday and Christmas. Because of you.
As she steps up to the podium, she delivers a final message directly to the man responsible for her daughter's death.
I wish you hate prison and stay there forever because society doesn't need you. I wish Judge Allen would say to me, there he is. Do whatever you want. I will kill you.
Before Judge Nadine Allen announces the sentence, Alsip offers a few words to the grieving family.
I cannot ever imagine the pain that the families. I just ask that you understand how sorry I really am.
Despite his words of remorse, Alsip received the maximum sentence, 8 years in an Ohio prison. Next, we head to Oakland County, Michigan. It's 9:30 a.m. And that's 33-year-old Jason Mendoza Cordero. He was just sentenced to 90 days in jail for disorderly conduct and retail fraud. He's waiting for a deputy to take him away. But notice just as the deputy enters the courtroom, Mendoza Cordero begins to gesture toward the back of the room. Then he casually moves in that direction, right out of the room. The deputy pursues him, while the judge, Nancy Carniak, and a couple of witnesses are left in the room. 2 minutes later, Mendoza Cordero picks up the pace as he sprints out the front door, down the walkway, and across the street. An officer in blue there notices the fleeing defendant and takes off, although in a different direction, probably in his car. 2 court officers exit the building on foot, with one of them in hot pursuit of the escapee. But Mendoza Cordero's freedom is short-lived. A few minutes later, he's captured in a wooded area not far from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office. Instead of doing 90 days, Mendoza Cordero is hit with additional charges of escaping lawful custody and resisting a police officer. He's sentenced to 153 days in the Oakland County Jail. Next, we head inside the Washington County Courthouse in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. The trial of Sean Kennedy. The charges are assault with a dangerous weapon and misdemeanor assault and battery. A year earlier, Kennedy allegedly attacked his church pastor, who was trying to help the defendant through a difficult period in his life. After punching the victim, Kennedy threw a ceramic lamp at him. He proceeded to trash his office. Kennedy's no stranger to the courtroom, having been arrested 22 times over the years, with felony convictions for assault and battery on a police officer and second-degree burglary. In court today, Kennedy's Sionin is Sheriff's Deputy John Zeilinger. Kennedy's accuser was just finished testifying, is heading back to the gallery when... Moments earlier, Zeilinger notices Kennedy fidgeting with papers and hears the defendant talking to himself. Watch as he leans over just before Kennedy erupts. First, he goes for Menard's neck and throws a few punches. Then he tries to kick his attorney, but comes up short, mostly due to the quick action of Deputy Zeilinger. The officer wrestles Kennedy to the ground. That's Judge Russell Vaclaw, who rushes over to immediately excuse the jury. This juror sneaks in one more peek at the chaos. Zeilinger, meanwhile, has Kennedy under control, puts him in cuffs. Menard is uninjured in the attack, but his soon-to-be former client picks up a second assault charge. Judge Vaclaw declares a mistrial, and Kennedy's bond of $50,000 is doubled to $100,000. Kennedy pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and after a psychiatric evaluation, is considered incompetent to stand trial. He's ordered to a state facility for further evaluation. Next, we take you to Olmsted Township, Ohio, for the arraignment of Stacy Reed and her brother Joseph Veselnik. Reed is charged with felonious assault, attempted murder, and aggravated burglary, while Veselnik's been charged with complicity in the same crimes. The incident allegedly occurred when the siblings arrived at the Falls Lounge at around 1 a.m. Stacy Reed, a former employee who was fired, was masked and carrying a knife. She then allegedly stabbed a bartender in the abdomen and slashed her face because she blamed her for the firing.
Somebody came in with a mask on, stabbed the bartender. We have the person down now, we're holding him down.
The bartender survived, but immediately after, a fight broke out amongst the patrons. 28-year-old Frank Castrucci, a friend of the defendants, was found dead outside the bar. The cause of death was undetermined. Reed and Veselnik were apprehended that night, charged with the attack on the bartender. They're not charged, however, in Castrucci's death. They're being held on separate bonds of $1 million each.
Ms. Reed, you have right to an attorney. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
At the arraignment, Reed is the first defendant to face the judge, T. Michelle Lynch. Sitting in the gallery, their son, who was found dead outside the bar. They feel the defendants are responsible. After the judge covers some formalities, Reed's attorney wants to discuss the $1 million bond, which he feels is too high.
She is 45 years old. She's a resident of Olmsted Township. Very limited criminal record. She only has one prior criminal case.
Notice the reaction from Castrucci.
She only has one prior criminal case. I understand the severity of these particular charges that she's been charged with, but I don't believe the bond is reasonable at $1 million. I would ask the court for a reasonable bond in this matter.
Officers, anything you'd like to say as to bond?
We'd like to leave it up to the court, Your Honor.
The police may not want to say anything, but Castrucci sure does.
My son's dead. You might want to let her out of jail. And my son laid down in a
Can
concrete.
you please come up here and identify yourself for the record?
Right over this way, Mr. Control. Don't worry, she ain't worth doing nothing to. Don't worry.
And what is your name?
Although Reed and Veselnik were not charged in the death of Castrucci's son, the victim's father sure seems to think they should have been.
My son was murdered over these people. Don't let her out.
Anybody else like to say anything in this matter?
Next, it's Holly Castrucci, the victim's stepmother, who comes forward.
She has a long criminal history. And she's nothing but trouble and trash, and our son is dead. So she need not get out of jail.
After hearing from the Castruccis, even though Castrucci's death has no connection to Reed's charges, Judge Lynch makes a ruling on the bond request.
At this point, I'm going to continue the $1 million cash surety bond.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next, it's Veselnik's turn before the judge. To complicate matters, Veselnik's currently dating Castrucci's daughter, who happens to be in the courtroom, sitting on the opposite side of her father. Before they start, the defendant glances over at the Castruccis. His attorney gives him some quick courtroom advice.
Look at anybody else. Look at the judge.
I'm ready, Your Honor.
Unlike his sister, Veselnik's attorney does not ask to lower the bond.
Continue the $1 million cash surety bond.
The ruling earns a smile from Castrucci. After the defendant looks over yet again, Castrucci reacts.
Look at me, boy. After my son was murdered because you're a scumbag.
Keep it down in there.
Yeah, that's what I got to do. I'm just going to
Castrucci heads for the exit. But as he leaves, he has a few words for his daughter, Veselnik's girlfriend.
There's my scumbag daughter over there that's sitting over here. What you're done visiting the county? Visit your brother in the morgue.
Reed took a deal and pleaded guilty to burglary and felonious assault. She was sentenced to 4 years in a state prison. Her brother also pleaded guilty to aggravated burglary. He received a sentence of 3 years probation, no jail time. As for Frank Castrucci, medical examiners continue to claim the cause of death is undetermined. Therefore, no charges were ever filed. Next, we're in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Kenneth Freeman is appearing for a bond hearing. The 27-year-old is facing a first-degree homicide charge for the brutal murder of 33-year-old Carly Bowden. Freeman's alleged to have hidden in the parking garage of a hospital where the victim worked as a nurse practitioner and ambushed her as she walked to her car. He's accused of violently beating the victim before leaving her to die underneath a parked vehicle in sub-zero temperatures. Freeman, who previously worked as a valet at the hospital before being fired, called 911 to report the crime and was arrested in the parking garage when police arrived.
Subject apparently appears to have a head injury, vital blood loss from the head.
Based on the severity of his alleged crime, the prosecution is asking for a $500,000 bond. Freeman's lawyer, however, disagrees.
He has no prior misdemeanor or felony convictions and no prior violent convictions, so we are asking for a low and reasonable amount of cash bail.
The attorney is correct that Freeman has never been convicted of a violent crime. But just 3 days before he's believed to have committed the murder, he can be seen in this body cam footage during a run-in with police.
Back up right now. Drop the hammer. Go back into your house. That's your only choice.
While responding to an unrelated call in an apartment complex, police encountered Freeman, who approached officers wielding a hammer.
Turn around. Turn your back. Approaching us with a hammer? You nuts?
He was arrested for obstructing an officer with a weapon, but was released 2 days later before the state could schedule a psychological exam. Just hours after his release, he's alleged to have carried out the murder in the parking garage. With that background information, the judge agrees with the prosecution and sets Freeman's bond at $500,000.
I do find probable cause. I do find you to be a substantial bail risk.
6 days later, Freeman's back in court, shackled and wearing a remote-controlled stun cuff on his leg. The stun cuffs are worn underneath clothing and can deliver 50,000 volts or more when activated remotely by corrections deputies in the courtroom. It's used for especially violent inmates who either attack corrections officers or make threats towards judges or court officials to question.
I do have reason to believe that competency is an issue in this case.
Well, I was going to say,
I would...
this nut...
Before the attorney finishes his statement,
competency is an issue in this case.
Freeman goes on a tirade.
Well, I was going to say, this nut...
As courtroom deputies approach, they administer an electrical shock through the stun cuff device hidden under his jail smock. Kenneth Freeman was later found not guilty of murder by reason of mental disease or defect and was committed for life to a state mental facility. That's it for this edition of Court Cam. I'm Dan Abrams.